from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, Washington's first day back to work. The White House, Capitol Hill, federal agencies all back in office. On the first full working day after the government shutdown ended overnight, we'll have developments from Capitol Hill when Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle, ranking member on the House Budget Committee, Republican Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz, as well of Texas, will join us.
Plus, from the idea of a 50-year mortgage to floating the potential for a $2,000 tariff rebate check, we'll dive into the economic policy proposals coming from the president when Peter Navarro, White House senior counselor for trade and manufacturing, joins us up ahead.
And now that a discharge petition on the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files has secured the 218th vote that would force a vote in the House, the pressure campaign being waged on some Republican lawmakers to remove their names from the list. We'll speak with the woman who was the 218th signature on that petition, the newly sworn-in Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva, on her first day in office. Up ahead. But we begin this evening with the news here in Washington as hundreds of thousands of furloughed workers get back on the job following a vote last night to fund the government. And with offices open for the first full day, the question now is about the agenda ahead and when Americans can expect crucial lifelines like SNAP benefits and air travel to be fully back up and running. Joining us now for more on the reopening of government, Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, who, as we mentioned, is ranking member on the House Budget Committee, also a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. It's good to have you back, Congressman. The last time you joined us, which was some months ago, you said one more rescissions package and the government would likely close. Here we are now, having reopened from the longest shutdown in our lives and, in fact, the history of America. And there are great questions about what happens next, whether a deal can be struck on Obamacare subsidies, and if not, will we shut down again in January? What do you think?
Well, it's great to be back with you, and I would have been happy to have been wrong in that prediction, but unfortunately it did play out exactly that way. And while we do have a government reopened at least until late January, I see no guarantee whatsoever that we won't be right back in this situation, because the two biggest issues remain unresolved, and that is addressing and fixing the healthcare crisis, the crisis specifically facing the Obamacare exchanges because of the failure of the Republican majority to extend those tax premium support payments, and then also the fact that rescissions still haven't been addressed. Literally at any point, first thing tomorrow, we could all of a sudden get a directive from the OMB that something else has been illegally rescinded by this White House. So both of those major sticking points remain unresolved, even though we have the government reopened, at least for a time being.
Well, Congressman, I'm glad that you brought up health care because, of course, that's been at the center of this. And President Trump commented on it last night when he was signing the government reopening back into law. I want to get your thoughts on this. We'll listen to the president and then chat with you on the other side.
I'm always willing to work with anyone, including the other party. We'll work on something having to do with health care. We can do a lot better. We can do great. So much money is involved, and we're willing to pay so much money to the people. So we're going to pay a lot of money to the people. They're going to go out and buy their own health care, and we're going to forget this Obamacare madness.
Congressman, I'm wondering what you make of the president's proposal there and where this is headed. Are we looking at an extension of these Affordable Care Act premium subsidies to work on a broader deal down the road, or are we looking at a totally new deal altogether?
Well, I didn't hear a proposal in that long rambling clip there from President Trump. I'm glad he said, at least at the beginning, he wanted to work with Democrats. By the way, it's the same Donald Trump who, when speaking extemporaneously in the Oval Office a few weeks ago, ordered Republican leadership to do the opposite, to not work with Democratic members. If there is one consistency in what Donald Trump has been saying literally for a decade now, it is that he hates Obamacare and wants to kill it. So I find it very hard to believe that he would be willing to extend these premium support credits that enable people to buy Obamacare, or I should actually correct myself there. They're not buying Obamacare, mind you. They're actually buying a private health insurance plan on the Obamacare or ACA exchange. It is, ironically, the great irony of the last 20 years. This was originally a center-right idea using the marketplace, using a collection of credits as well as taxes to help make the marketplace work so people can go on an exchange and shop a number of private insurance plans. There's a reason why this was originally crafted at a right-of-center think tank, and of course it was a Republican governor then in Massachusetts who brought it into existence. So the whole hysteria around Obamacare for the last 15 years has really been a fact-free zone.
It is remarkable that this came from the Heritage Foundation and was once called Romney Care. Congressman, the president says he wants Trump care. But I'd like to get to your role as ranking member on the Budget Committee, because we keep hearing from Republican leaders in the House, beginning with the Speaker himself, that regular order is back. We've got a couple of bills in the minibus that was passed that will fund a couple of agencies for the rest of the year. But a lot of work remains to be done here. Is there a world in which we'll have 12 spending bills ready by January 30th?
Well, it's a little hard to do that work when the House of Representatives is suddenly canceled and out of session for 6 consecutive weeks, which is exactly what happened over the last 6 weeks. We were supposed to be in session 5 of those 6 weeks. That is time that I think is impossible now to make up. It was a completely bizarre decision by Speaker Mike Johnson. In any previous government shutdown, and unfortunately I've now been through several, typically we were in session around the clock, including weekends, in order to find a way out and solve the problem. The fact that we were sent home was truly inexcusable. It was interesting, just back home here in Philadelphia, when I've talked to people on the street, whether Democrat, Republican, Independent, the one thing they could all agree on was they thought it was absolutely outrageous that members of Congress were not actually forced to be in the Capitol doing work to attempt to solve this problem. So I am rather skeptical that we will see 12 appropriations bills passed, certainly by late January. And finally, I would remind you, the last time all 12 appropriations bills passed on time was 1997. The fact is, this is a broken process that I believe needs full reform.
I'm wondering, since you did mention that you've been through a few shutdowns here, what lessons we're learning about how things should be done differently when we are up against a deadline. I'm thinking about data and whether or not essential government data should be deemed essential. I'm also thinking about the air traffic control system and whether or not those workers should be paid the next time that we're faced with a cliff like this.
You know, this is something that I've had a lot of internal conversations with even Republican colleagues of mine about, including my counterpart in the Budget Committee, the Republican chair, Jody Arrington. And he may be, you know, a very conservative member from West Texas, and here I am, a Democrat from Pennsylvania. But something he and I both agree on is that the 1974 Act of Congress that actually governs the entire appropriations process is in bad need of updating. It has been 51 years. That act had a lot of positive things in it, including the creation of the budget committees, the creation of the Congressional Budget Office, really a landmark piece of legislation. But the appropriations process it designed literally has not worked for the last, almost 3 decades. It is badly in need of updating, I think, fundamental reform. What exactly that looks like, obviously, is up for debate. But that's the kind of thing that if I have the opportunity to become chair, I'm really going to make one of my top priorities.
I have to ask you while you're with us about Senator John Fetterman, who had a fall this morning. We understand he got a little banged up and has been admitted to the hospital. Have you had a chance to talk to the senator since this happened?
I haven't. I will say, though, I'm glad and relieved to hear that he's okay. Obviously, that was, when I saw the news this afternoon was quite the shock. But it sounds like he's doing a lot better. And I publicly issued a statement and tweeted my warm regards. I have not been in full agreement with the senior senator from Pennsylvania on a number of things as of late. but I certainly hope he and his family are doing well.
All right. Thanks so much. Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, thanks for joining us here on Bloomberg.
Thank you.
And another major story that we're following tonight is the potential for a U.S. operation in Venezuela. With reports, military officials have presented the president with multiple options, including a potential ground strike. Joining us now for more insight is Bloomberg's Eric Martin here with us in our Washington studios. And Eric, what do we know about what's leading up to this report? How did we get to this point in time?
Well, Tyler, we've seen since August this accumulation of U.S. assets in the southern Caribbean. In early September, we saw the first of these strikes, which have now killed about 75 alleged criminals, alleged drug runners in the southern Caribbean, and also expanded to the Pacific. And we're seeing just now the aircraft carrier Ford arriving to the southern Pacific. And so this is the greatest accumulation of assets we've seen at any point in this process that's been going on for several months now. And a lot of speculation. The president has spoken to the idea about whether the cartels need to be hit on land in addition to the boats that have been blown out of the water so far by the U.S. And so a lot of attention on this was with Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday in Canada at the G7 foreign ministers meeting. He said that his counterparts didn't raise this in meetings, but we know that, for instance, the French foreign minister raised questions about the legality of these strikes to the press. And Secretary Rubio responding that they are protecting the U.S., they are protecting the citizens who have seen hundreds of thousands of people killed by fentanyl overdoses in the last number of years, and that these are foreign terrorist organizations, drawing a line saying we're used to people making the argument that to be a terrorist, it needs to be ideological, but that terrorism isn't necessarily ideological, and that this is terrorism in terms of what this has been doing, disrupting so many hundreds of thousands of lives and killing so many people.
You mentioned the idea of potential land attacks, airstrikes, presumably. The United States has a lot of experience with over-the-horizon operations here. Why would we need the biggest aircraft carrier in our arsenal? The strike group that comes with it means an enormous amount of firepower off the coast of Venezuela. What else would we use it for?
Well, Joe, certainly what analysts have talked about is what this show of force means. Yeah. It's been a long time since we've seen these kinds of assets deployed in the Western Hemisphere and near South America. But maybe this is something that we should be becoming more used to, given the priority of the Trump administration on the hemisphere and on stopping drugs. Secretary Rubio yesterday talked about the cooperation that the U.S. is getting from Mexico on the issue of fentanyl. And one of the reasons that these strikes have needed to happen in the Caribbean is because they're not getting similar cooperation from Nicolas Maduro, who he always reminds us the Southern District of New York has declared to be a drug criminal. And therefore, this idea of an illegitimate government in Venezuela doesn't help the U.S. on stopping drugs, unlike, say, on the U.S. southern border in the land with Mexico, where the Sheinbaum administration has been, and that this is something that needs to be addressed with greater firepower, with direct strikes, because in part of the lack of cooperation.
Well, today, Maduro fast-tracked a bill to strengthen the country's defenses. We have a headline on the terminal that Venezuelans are urged to spy on their neighbors as U.S. warship nears. What do we know about how Venezuela has been responding to what's going on in terms of the U.S. moving assets into the region?
Certainly, we've seen Maduro calling up Venezuelan troops and making very public statements about amassing thousands of Venezuelan troops ready to respond. But in fact, Venezuela has a pretty aged capacity in terms of the aircraft that is available to it, and in terms of the capabilities of the Venezuelan army. They certainly have some ability to defend, but when you talk about the kinds of assets and the sophistication and the technical cutting-edge ability of the U.S. assets that have been put in place in the Southern Caribbean in recent months, certainly the Venezuelan capabilities pale in comparison to the U.S. military.
All right. Fascinating story. Covering it all for us here. Bloomberg's Eric Martin, thank you so much. And coming up, we'll turn our attention across the aisle to Republican Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz of Texas and get her perspective on the reopening of the government. And later, we'll dive into the state of the economy following the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Peter Navarro, White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing, up ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington, and we'll have more from Capitol Hill in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. Blue Origin successfully launched its flagship New Glenn rocket from Cape Canaveral earlier today, successfully reaching space and landing its first stage booster shortly after launch. It's considered a major feat for the Jeff Bezos-backed company. Staff in the control room can be seen celebrating the moment after landing with the goal of making New Glenn partially reusable, with recovered boosters to be recycled for multiple launches.
And the BBC issued a formal apology to President Trump over a misleading edit of the president's speech in a documentary program that aired last year. BBC Chairman Samir Shah sent a personal letter to the White House, quote, making clear to President Trump that he and the corporation are sorry for the edit of the president's speech. However, the network rejected the president's demands for compensation. Lawyers writing to Trump's legal team to say they strongly disagree there is a basis for a defamation claim.
Heavy selling returning to Wall Street today despite some optimism over the government reopening, with hawkish statements from Fed officials and worries about the sustainability of AI spending causing traders to dump risky assets. The S&P 500 fell more than 1.5%. The Nasdaq lost over 2%. The Dow down 1.5%, almost 800 points. Bitcoin tumbled back below $100,000 and the VIX hit 20. Disney had its worst day since April, dropping nearly 8%. After sales fell short of Wall Street estimates, and the company said a slate of upcoming films would weigh on results in the first quarter of the new fiscal year. In other big media news, after the bell, Warner Brothers Discovery shares rising on news in post-market trading, up about 5% after the Wall Street Journal reported that Paramount, Comcast, and Netflix are all preparing bids for the company. Citing people familiar with the matter, it remains unclear if the bids will be for the entire WBD or just parts of the company.
And while the longest government shutdown in U.S. history has come to an end, federal officials are warning it could take days or weeks before normal operations resume. Payroll systems must be updated to pay out weeks of back wages, and backlogs of applications and customer constituent calls that went unanswered for 43 days will now need to be cleared. Joining us live from Capitol Hill is Republican Congresswoman Monica De La Cruz of Texas. She's a member of both the House Agriculture Committee and House Financial Services. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg. The government just reopened. Lawmakers are back to work, but it feels like that work is just beginning. I'd love to get your thoughts on if we are just careening towards the next government shutdown, as this stopgap measure only funds us through January 30th, and it feels like health care could be that pressure point again.
Well, I can tell you this, that my office has not stopped working since the government shut down. In fact, we've closed 100 cases, brought in millions of dollars back to our constituents. It's the Democrats who chose this chaos. Never before in the history of America has either party ever voted down a clean CR. Clean, with no partisan priorities. But Democrats wanted to put legislation discussion on the table and shut down our government, thus taking away food from families in need through SNAP, having mothers with children go without benefits, and, as you mentioned, federal employees on furlough not receiving paychecks, and putting a halt to government activities that affect everything from small businesses to the person who's applying for a Social Security card. It's simply unacceptable, and I'm glad the Democrats finally came to their senses.
Well, let's follow up a little bit more on this. You're in House Agriculture, and some states are saying that those families that need those food benefits aren't going to see their SNAP accounts replenished for the month of November for at least another couple of weeks. Do you think the administration should have put forth a plan to fully fund SNAP benefits if we knew that we were getting close to the shutdown?
Well, what we thought was that Democrats were going to act logically and work for the American people and vote yes on a clean CR. This is historic that Democrats would put themselves first before the American people and shut down the government. It is them that caused these families that are so dependent on SNAP to not receive their benefits. In fact, what President Trump did was try to partially fund SNAP at the last moment because the Democrats kept kicking the ball forward and keeping the government shut. It's clearly unacceptable. And as you said, now it's going to take weeks, if not months, for the government to fully open. And unfortunately, some families will suffer because of the chaos that the Democrats caused. But I will tell you this. We are here in Washington, D.C. There are committees already working on the Hill to push these appropriation process forward so that we can get the bills passed before January 30th. I think we're all on the same page that that needs to be a priority, along with the credits, the enhanced premium credits that will sunset at the end of December. We all realize that this is important, and we're sitting at the table, both Republicans and Democrats, ready to tackle this issue.
It was the administration as well when it comes to SNAP benefits that went to the Supreme Court to compel a lower court to keep the administration from fully funding SNAP benefits. We've never heard of anything quite like that before, Congresswoman. Was that the right thing to do?
Well, we've never heard of Democrats voting no to a clean CR.
I know, but you've been talking about Democrats since you came on the air, Congresswoman. Was that the right thing for the administration to do, to not fund SNAP benefits and, in fact, go to court over this?
Well, I keep talking about Democrats because we would never even have this discussion
if
Democrats actually voted yes for a clean CR. So
okay, you've made that really clear. Should the administration have gone to the Supreme Court to not pay people who need food?
Well, I can tell you this, we would not even have this discussion if Democrats had done their job and voted yes on a clean CR, which historically they had never voted no to. In fact, they voted no 13 times to put those SNAP benefits as a priority for the American people and keep families fed. And it's unfortunate that they kept voting no. So we wouldn't even be having this discussion if they had done their job and voted yes on a clean CR.
But we are having this discussion. You're not going to answer that question?
Well, as I said, we would not have this discussion had Democrats voted for a clean CR. Absolutely historic and catastrophic that they would be that selfish to take food off of the table of needy families.
So the president should have gone to court then to block those SNAP benefits from being fulfilled.
So what should have happened is Democrats should have voted yes for a clean continuing resolution. That's what should have happened. And what ended up is the chaos that ensued over the last 6 weeks. Everything from federal employees not being paid, TSA employees not being paid. I mean, the list goes on and on. But as you noted, Democrats finally came to their senses yesterday and voted yes. Yes for the American people and yes to reopen this government. Now it's time for all of us to look forward and complete the appropriations process and look at the premium credits, enhanced premium credits that we need to discuss.
All right, Congresswoman, we'd love to keep the conversation going with you. Monica De La Cruz, a Republican from Texas on Bloomberg, we thank you for joining us. Coming up, Bloomberg's exclusive interview with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskiy, when he says Ukraine's survival rests on funds from allies. We'll have those comments next, and a conversation with Peter Navarro, straight from the White House. It's all ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew. Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council this morning, said the October jobs report would be released without a reading of the unemployment rate. The household survey, which produces the jobless rate, of course, was not conducted in October, as we've been reporting, due to the government shutdown. Take a listen.
The September jobs report has already been cooked, and we expect we might get that next week. The October employment report for the payroll side will be able to be calculated, but the household survey wasn't completed. So we'll get sort of half the jobs report. Most everything else, I think, we'll be able to concoct the correct number after we look back. But we will never know what the unemployment rate was in October because there wasn't a household survey.
Joining us now with a view from inside the administration is Peter Navarro, White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing. He's live with us here in our Washington bureau. It's nice to see you again.
Great to meet you.
Thanks for coming over from the White House.
Yeah, I always love being in here.
Well, so no household survey, and we don't get a September jobs report, right? Can the Fed make a credible decision to cut rates at the next meeting?
Fed could have made a credible decision 2 months ago.
Okay.
Basically looking at this. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I think the risks are clearly to the downside on the jobs. It's a strong argument for cutting rates, which they should have done already by, they're 50, 75 basis points behind already. And with the shutdown, clearly that's not going to improve job prospects. So what are they waiting for? Look, I think that Jay Powell is almost purposely being obstructionist to this administration.
He's been
cutting. Screwed us the last time. He's doing it again. I don't know why. The man is costing this country literally hundreds of billions of dollars in growth and thousands of jobs.
So he's been cutting, but not enough, is what you're saying.
He's too late, Powell. He's too. I mean, look, he did it the first time around. He was too early when in the first term. Everybody agrees that he raised rates too fast on us because he thought our supply side stimulus was somehow going to create inflation. He didn't understand basic economics. And then when Biden's in, he was too late. He's the one, along with Biden and Buttigieg and the others, who ignited the inflation. And now what the hell is he doing? And he first of all, he blames tariffs. And then he has an epiphany. Well, tariffs might not. It's like, no. It's time. It's time. And Jay, I mean, if he was an honorable man and this were Japan, he'd leave. He'd just leave. He's not doing anybody any good.
Well, we did want to ask you about the future of tariffs.
Have I made myself clear on Jay?
I think so.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, we did want to ask you about the future of tariffs, which is, of course, the backdrop here when we're talking about the FOMC. We've heard administration officials, including Kevin Hassett, tell Bloomberg that the administration's already looking at other authorities like Section 232, Section 122, Section 301, in case IEEPA does get struck down. Can all of those authorities make up the type of tariff revenue that we would lose if the Supreme Court weighs against this administration's policy?
I've looked very, very carefully, listened very carefully to the oral arguments, and I think we're in a really strong position. I think that the way it was popularly received in the press, I don't think the press did a fair job of handicapping the race. And there seems to be some negativity out there. But when I look at what everybody said, I'll tell you the two issues. Is it tariff a tax?
Right.
And it's not in the context that it's administered. And most important, the fact that the word tariff doesn't appear in the string of things which IEEPA allows was something that the plaintiffs really pushed hard on. But it's a total red herring, because when you see it in the totality of the history and the law and case law like Algonquin, it's very clear that the Supreme Court, if it wants to, has a very strong legal argument to support the tariff. So our first best is to have the Supreme Court support the Trump tariffs. As Justice Amy Coney Barrett said, it's going to be a mess otherwise. So that's the first thing. Now, with respect to those other authorities, there's a bunch of other authorities. What was spoken about in the oral arguments actually pointed to their possible uses. But I think the best thing would be for the Supreme Court to rule as case law and history, and the Constitution would allow them to do it and support it. There's a very, very strong argument for our side.
I'm deeply curious about this idea. Maybe you're already talking about it inside the White House or with folks on Capitol Hill about saying, okay, if it is a tax, then we'll go have another reconciliation package and call it a tax and put it in legislation.
Yeah, I don't want to go there because it's not a tax. It's a tariff. There's a reason why you have separate words. And you have to make the fine distinction between the Article 1 powers of Congress with respect to taxation. That refers to domestic taxation to raise revenues. These tariffs are being administered, and incidentally, they raise a bunch of revenues, but it's in the context of regulating importation of products for the purpose of addressing national emergencies of both the fentanyl emergency and more broadly the trade deficit, which is no question it's an emergency. So let's see what happens, but I'm just telling you, if you look at that carefully and you listen, there's a very, very strong argument in support of those tariffs that comes out on the two big issues of tax and the absence of the explicit word of tariffs in the string.
Well, tariffs have been impacting Americans' perception when it comes to inflation expectations. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about a new Harris poll that was conducted for Bloomberg News, which shows that half of respondents in October said that the economy isn't working for them. And then 64% said that their price of household goods has gone up. I'm wondering what you make of what we are learning from the data about how Americans feel about this, particularly as consumer sentiment has also hit near record lows.
So the first thing I want to say is that President Trump viscerally understands the pain many Americans are going through because of the inflation issue. And a lot of that pain is centered on our MAGA base. And we understand that. Now, politically, what's interesting is we're facing the same kind of problem that Ronald Reagan faced coming off his win over Jimmy Carter. He broke the back of inflation beginning in '81 with the help of Paul Volcker, big help from Paul Volcker. But by the time the midterms rolled around in '82, the lags associated with inflation coming out were too long for the voters to feel good about that. We lost the House in that case, and we wound up with terrible gridlock. So we are mindful of the history. We're mindful of the lags. Let me explain what I mean by lags with something as simple as the price of chicken and the price of beef. Okay? We come in, and both are very high. Chicken's high because what we call the great chicken slaughter by the Biden administration over an avian flu thing, and also the price of feed going up because of the Green New Deal. Okay? Chicken's going off the roof. Eggs are going off the roof. We solve that very quickly because the lag is short. It's about 45 days from egg to supermarket, okay? And so the Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins did a very good job. We went in and we attacked that, and that's done, okay? That's good. Beef, okay? The lag there is as much as 2 to 2.5 years, because you've got to go through from calving to all of that. And so beef prices are still high, but we are attacking that with a whole range of issues, and it's complicated by things like drought. So what we have to do, here's the punchline. That was a long explanation, but what we have to do as an administration is first of all, be crystal clear about the sources of the inflation. Yep. What we still have, because of these lags, is a Biden legacy inflation from everything from the over-fiscal stimulus to the Green New Deal to 20 million illegal aliens coming up and driving up rents. We still have. We got to explain that. We've got to explain very carefully by category: housing, health insurance, transportation, energy, how we are attacking the problem. And we are taking this seriously. This is issue number one for us, and it will be for the foreseeable future, and that means the whole administration. And I'll come back next week or whatever, and I'll go chapter and verse about what we're doing in each of those categories. But I want everybody to understand that we're after this. We're making really good progress in some areas where things are moving too slow. It's explained not by what we're doing, but by how long it takes.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll take you up on that to continue the conversation.
Good to see you both.
Peter Navarro, White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing at the White House, thank you so much. And coming up, our conversation with the newly sworn-in Democratic Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva of Arizona about what's on her agenda for Capitol Hill. That's up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Tyler Kendall. Coming up, our conversation with newly sworn-in Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva. But first, more stories we're tracking in today's Power Brief. President Trump is expected to attend the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos next year, according to people familiar with his planning. The move signals a warming of U.S.-Swiss relations as the two nations close in on a trade deal and could present a chance to reset relations amid tough negotiations with the White House.
The administration is moving to fire a furloughed USDA employee after she warned of the negative impact of the shutdown on food benefits on TV earlier this month. The employee was told that she will be let go 30 days after the shutdown ends for allegedly discussing the program and funding without prior approval. She now has 20 days to contest her dismissal.
And Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced $10,000 bonus checks for TSA officers who worked without pay during the 6-week government shutdown. Noem called the payments a reward for exemplary service under strain and said the move would help employees who took extra shifts to keep security lines moving as paychecks stopped. While Congress passed a funding measure late last night, officials said it could take days to restore normal operations and clear payroll backlogs.
As business on Capitol Hill resumes, the House of Representatives being in session brings with it a new lawmaker. After Arizona Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva was sworn in last night, 7 weeks after winning a special election to replace her father. This afternoon, we spent some time with the newly sworn-in Congresswoman to talk about what's at the top of her agenda now that she's on Capitol Hill, and began by asking about the 50 days she waited to take the oath, something she called an abuse of power. Listen.
My hope is that we're going to be able to put forward bipartisan legislation to prevent that from ever happening again. No one person should ever be able to silence over 800,000 people. And it doesn't matter what party you are. Like, this is an abuse regardless. And we never want to see it again.
Did you have a conversation with House Speaker Mike Johnson about this? Did the two of you sit down and talk about what happened here?
Oh, no. So right at the very end, after I was sworn in publicly, made my speech, said hi to a couple members, I was asked to sort of whisk off because Speaker Johnson was ready to do like the formal picture. And so I walked over and he said, well, this was never personal. And I said, it felt a little personal. It really did. And I said, if you ever want to know what it is that we were actually able to do or not do in our office without a budget, I'm happy to talk about it because we literally could do nothing. And then, he said what he said publicly. One of the questions with the gaggle was, what took so long? I said, oh, that's not my question. That would go over to the speaker.
Well, of course, a lot of people speculated that this had something to do with the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, knowing that you were going to sign on to a discharge petition, which you did moments after your swearing in. And there's a big question about what happens next here, Congresswoman. It looks like there will be a vote next week, realizing there might not be an appetite for this in the Senate. Will these files actually be made public?
I hope so. I hope that it passes the House without any issue and that the pressure then goes to senators. Because regardless of who is implicated, no one should want the label of protecting pedophiles. And, I talked to some survivors today, and I said, one of the things that I would do is go and target your senators, talk to them about why it's important for them to show unity in this, and then go and call some of their constituents and make sure that there's a connection there. When you hear from your own constituents about an issue, it's that much more meaningful. And I think that it would be very important for constituents throughout the nation to reach out to their senators and let them know that they expect them to vote in favor of releasing the Epstein files.
Well, those are constituents to senators. Are there any conversations happening between the chambers on how this is going to go between your now new colleagues in the Senate and the other members in the House? Well,
I'm assuming that there is some conversation amongst leadership, but I don't know any specifics about that.
This is a heck of a time to be joining the House of Representatives, Congresswoman. We spoke with Democrats and Republicans over the past 24 hours, some of them senior lawmakers who said this is as bad as we've ever seen it. And I know we can go through history and probably find worse times. No one's being caned on the floor yet. But I'm wondering what you're feeling as you join your colleagues here in Washington, because there's a sense of anger and frustration in the air today, even after the government reopened, that's taken a lot of us by surprise.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of separation, partisanship. This administration has done what they could to increase those divides. When you look at what Trump has done in pitting his own party against each other, really it's just to further his own agenda, which has nothing to do with improving the lives of the American people. And so I think it's very difficult if you are a defender of Trump to put your neck out right now when he's done everything he could to make sure that it's really about him and his supporters and nobody else.
Well, what, of course, led us to this moment is that we saw negotiations try and ultimately fail to get an extension when it comes to the premium tax subsidies related to the Affordable Care Act. I'm wondering what you are advocating for now as a member of the House. Are you looking for an extension to this, or is this something that's going to have to see a whole new plan come together ahead of that deadline at the end of December?
Well, what's really interesting is that the Republicans have had critical things to say about the Affordable Care Act since its inception in 2010. They have had 15 years to work on a better plan. All they do is throw stones at it, but don't actually come to the table with any real solutions. So I don't think it's the Democrats' responsibility to come up with a solution that they don't see a problem with. If we want to work to improve the ACA, I'm all for that. Universal health care, I think, should be the base of what the American people deserve. So I'm in favor of universal health care, period. And then we can get all of the big money out of this system. That, I think, would be ideal. But here we are. This is not a problem that Democrats have. This is a problem that Republicans have. And who's going to have a bigger problem is every single one of those people who voted against extending the ACA benefits. They're going to hear very clearly from their constituents.
Well, of course, there's not a lot of time to reinvent the healthcare system here in America. So if it's anything short of extending these subsidies, it might get a little complicated by January 30th, Congresswoman. In that world, if there's no deal, do we shut down again?
And that's what one of the things I did speak to Speaker Johnson about is, why do we continue to have piecemeal CRs? Why can't we negotiate an entire budget for the year? I don't know any functioning company or organization that does budgeting this way. And he said, I would love to have that, but there's no interest. I said, I think part of the problem is you're not bringing to the table things that both parties want to work on. I mean, that was indicative of this clean CR that left the House, went to the Senate, was voted down 13 times. It had no input from Democrats at all. When both chambers, and especially the House, is so close, why wouldn't you try to work a solution that's going to include some of the things that Democrats could support, and then vote and then send a package that is a bipartisan package to the Senate? He didn't do that. He chose to keep the House closed. And I think it's very telling in our economic reality right now in this nation that the House of Representatives has been working 19 days in 4 months.
Well, Congresswoman, in the final minute that we have you, I'm curious, have you gotten your committee assignments yet? And are there any that you're keen to join, considering as we're laying out it's an understatement to say it's going to be a busy legislation season coming up?
Right. Well, I did ask for education and workforce and natural resources. I was asked to rank those if what would be the one if I only had to pick one, and I chose education and workforce. I am willing to work on any committee that I feel my background would be beneficial, but I also am willing to learn because I think I have so much to learn, and I think that it is an opportunity for me to get stronger in a lot of the different areas. So with that, I am open to it, but I would love to put my 20 years as a school board member in support of rebuilding the devastation that this administration has done to the Department of Education. But I'm willing to learn.
That was Democratic Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva speaking with us earlier today on Bloomberg.
And an exclusive interview with Bloomberg Television in Kyiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy discussed the ongoing war with Russia and the EU's plan to help fund Ukraine's war effort using frozen Russian assets, if they can come to terms on this. In a conversation with Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, here's what Zelensky said about needing support from the EU.
So the incursions into European airspace that we've seen by the Russians over the last few months, you said at one point that it's a test of whether or not Putin's strategy is working if some European countries do not deliver air defense systems that they promised you. Have those deliveries happened, in the sense that has Putin scared the Europeans into withholding those for their own purposes?
I think he scared them. That was his goal, and he achieved it. The Europeans reacted. How did they react? That's a question for NATO countries and for every country that experienced aerial intimidation. It was psychological intimidation, without a doubt. There is a practical side to this, in my opinion. He is also testing readiness, not just reaction, but readiness. Who is ready to repel this or that attack? Although compared to us, you can't call it a major attack. But nevertheless, that's the point. I believe that there are many factors at play here. One is the slowdown in the transfer of air defense systems. Different systems, different drones, different ranges of air defense systems, and also electronic warfare. He did it before winter. I think the main thing is definitely psychological pressure and testing the strength of individual European countries. But everything is being done to slow down the transfer of air defense systems to Ukraine.
You can catch more of Oliver Crook's conversation with Ukraine's Zelenskiy on the terminal and online. And, Joe, it comes as we're getting breaking news that explosions are heard near Kyiv amid what, according to local reports, seems like a large-scale missile attack from Russia. Yeah, the Kyiv Independent reporting its drones, its missiles, air raid sirens are being heard. And it's not just Kyiv. It's a large-scale attack on various regions of the country, to the east and the west, and we'll keep tabs on this for you throughout the evening here. It's unfolding right now in Ukraine. We thank you for joining us on Balance of Power and all of our guests for their insights. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and Radio.